He won the battle before noon. By sunset, he had already lost command. No one told him directly. No blade was drawn against him. No accusation was spoken in anger. But when the ships returned to shore, the men did not gather around him the way they always had. That was the first sign. Not defeat, not betrayal, distance. The raid had been clean, fast landing, shield wall held, flank maneuver executed exactly as he ordered. 2 rival banners fell before midday. The opposing leader was captured alive. Losses were minimal, silver taken, supplies secured. It should have strengthened his authority. Victories usually did. But this victory shifted something else. On the shore, when the ships were dragged onto wet sand, men spoke in smaller groups. They looked at him, but not with the usual expectation. They were measuring him, measuring what the victory meant. Not how well he fought. That was obvious. They were calculating what came next. He noticed it first when dividing spoils. Traditionally, the leader speaks first. He allocates, he acknowledges effort, he rewards loyalty. That ritual reaffirms hierarchy. But this time, before he spoke, another voice offered suggestion. Calm, reasonable, not aggressive, just present. He ignored it. He continued the distribution, but something had shifted. A suggestion that would once have been private was made publicly, and it was not shut down immediately by others. Silence followed the suggestion. That silence was the crack. Victory gives a leader credit, but too much credit creates imbalance, and imbalance creates fear. He had led 3 successful raids in a row. His name carried weight beyond his settlement now. Other villages had begun mentioning him. That kind of recognition spreads fast. And when recognition spreads, rivals do not always come from enemies. Sometimes they come from allies. Back in the longhouse that evening, the mood was not celebration. It was controlled. Ale was poured. Meat was shared. But the usual loud recounting of the fight did not center on him. Men described the clash. They described the moment shields broke. They described the captured enemy. But they did not repeat his name as often as they should have. Instead, they repeated another name. The man who had secured the flank. The man who had held formation. The man who had prevented heavier losses. All true, but repetition is alignment. He listened. He did not interrupt. Leaders who defend credit too aggressively appear insecure. He waited for someone to anchor the narrative back to him. No one did. That was loss number 2. The next morning, planning began for winter storage. Normally, he would assign tasks directly. Instead, men began volunteering before he finished sentences. Volunteering is good, but it bypassed instruction. Bypassing instruction reduces authority. He let it pass. 2 days later, something more direct happened. A dispute over captured land was brought forward. Normally, he would mediate. Instead, one of the older warriors suggested they discuss it together first. Together. That word replaces leadership with committee. He felt the shift fully then. Not anger, not rebellion, replacement. His rival, the one praised in the longhouse, did not challenge him openly. He did something more effective. He acted useful, quietly, repeatedly, publicly. He helped repair boats. He assisted with livestock. He spoke calmly about stability. He thanked the men for their effort before the leader did. Gratitude is powerful when timed correctly. Within a week, conversations stopped turning when he approached. They continued, but adjusted. Adjusted to include him politely. Politeness is not loyalty. He tested something. During the next gathering, he gave an order quickly. Direct, clear. There was a pause. Not refusal. Pause. And someone else repeated the order softer as if translating it. That was loss number 3. When your command needs rephrasing, it is no longer dominant. He began noticing seating arrangements. At meals, the rival sat closer to the center fire, not directly beside him. That would be challenge. But close enough to be seen. Visibility is positioning. One evening, he overheard something worse. Two younger warriors debating next year's raid. One of them said, "If we go again, we should be careful. Success draws attention. Success draws attention, not pride, not strength. Attention." He understood then. The victory had made him larger than the settlement. And settlements do not tolerate members who grow too large unless they control that growth. Control was shifting. He could challenge it openly. But open challenge forces sides to declare themselves. And he did not yet know how many would declare for him. That uncertainty is the most dangerous moment for any leader. He chose patience. Patience can look like weakness. 3 weeks after the battle, a message arrived from a neighboring territory. They requested negotiation, not with him, with the council. The word was deliberate. There had never been a formal council. Now there was. He watched how the men reacted to the message. No one corrected the wording. No one insisted his name be used. That was loss number 4. He was still leader, technically. No vote had been called, no accusation made. But leadership in Viking society was not only about title, it was about recognition. Recognition was thinning, and thinning is quieter than revolt. The rival did not move against him. He did something smarter. He agreed with him in public. Often. But he added something afterward. A refinement, a caution, an improvement. Each addition made him appear balanced. Balanced is safer than bold. And safety attracts men who are thinking about winter. The real damage came not from confrontation, but from comparison. He had won the battle, but the rival was winning the peace. And peace is where power settles. 1 month after the victory, during a small dispute over trade allocation, something irreversible happened. He made a decision. Clear, final. No one objected, but no one affirmed it either. The decision passed through the room like cold air, unwarmed, unclaimed. That was the moment he understood. He had won the battle, but he had lost the room. And in Viking society, you can survive losing land. You cannot survive losing the room. The next gathering did not begin with conflict. It began with routine. That was what made it dangerous. Routine gives the illusion that structure remains intact. He entered the longhouse at the usual hour. He sat in the usual place. The fire burned at the center. Men took their positions along the walls. Nothing had changed in shape, only in weight. He spoke first, as tradition required. He addressed trade routes for the coming season. Calm voice, direct phrasing. He finished without interruption. And again there was no resistance, no argument, just that same careful silence. Then the rival spoke, not to oppose, to add clarity. He repeated the leader's plan, but simplified it. Shorter sentences, clearer structure. He nodded respectfully while speaking. The men nodded back. That was loss number 5. When another man can restate your authority more effectively than you, he becomes the bridge, and men follow bridges in uncertain weather. Over the next days, requests began bypassing him. A fisherman asked the rival about boat repair schedules. A farmer consulted him about shared oxen. Small matters, practical matters, but practical matters build daily loyalty. Leadership is not maintained only in raids. It is maintained in distribution, in winter planning, in settling minor friction before it becomes visible. The rival positioned himself exactly there. He did not take title. He took responsibility. And responsibility, when accepted repeatedly, becomes legitimacy. The former leader felt it most during dispute resolution. 2 brothers argued over inheritance of a captured weapon. Normally, he would hear both sides and conclude. This time, before he could finish listening, one of the brothers said, "Perhaps we should ask him as well." Not hostile, not accusatory, simply inclusive. Inclusive weakens hierarchy. The rival declined at first, a show of humility. But the men insisted. He offered a measured opinion, balanced, reasonable. The decision aligned with what the leader would have ruled. But it was his voice that settled the tension. That was loss number 6. Authority is not only in deciding, it is in being expected to decide. That expectation was dividing. The leader began to test loyalty quietly. He called a smaller meeting of older warriors, men who had fought beside him for years. He spoke plainly. He asked whether there was dissatisfaction. They denied it, respectfully, but none of them affirmed him either. No one said, "You are still the only one fit to lead." They spoke of stability, of caution, of how success brings scrutiny. Scrutiny from whom? He did not ask. He already knew. Success had made him visible beyond their settlement. Other clans had begun to treat him as a rising force, and rising forces draw either alliance or preemption. Within his own walls, preemption had begun, not through removal, through reduction. His next command was followed immediately. No pause. That gave him brief reassurance. But he noticed something else. Men executed it without looking to him again. They did not seek further instruction. They sought confirmation from the rival instead. Micro-adjustments, minor clarifications. It was subtle, but repeated. Repetition builds new centers of gravity. One evening during meal distribution, seating shifted fully. The rival was now directly across the fire from him. Equal line of sight, equal illumination, not beside, across. That was not accidental. Across creates comparison, and comparison invites judgment. The younger warriors began asking questions differently. Instead of, "What do we do?" they asked, "What do we think?" Language changes before power does. He tried to reassert decisiveness. During discussion about next year's expansion, he stated firmly that they would not raid further south. Too exposed, too risky. The rival did not oppose him. He agreed, but he added that strength sometimes requires visible confidence. That hesitation can invite aggression. He said it calmly, without accusation. But the implication lingered. Hesitation. The word stayed in the air. That was loss number 7. Doubt had been introduced publicly, doubt framed as prudence, and prudence framed as fear. Over the following week, external messengers arrived. One addressed the rival directly, not disrespectfully, simply by name. When corrected, he apologized. But the damage was done. Recognition had begun adjusting beyond the settlement too. Recognition is power's mirror. And the mirror was tilting. He considered confrontation, a direct challenge in front of all. But confrontation forces choice, and choice reveals numbers. If the count was not in his favor, removal would be immediate. If it was barely in his favor, resentment would harden beneath compliance. Either outcome weakened the future. So he waited. Waiting narrows options. The rival continued his pattern. Assist, clarify, stabilize, never attack. The leader began noticing that laughter gathered more easily around the rival. Not because he was funnier, because tension dissolves near perceived safety. Safety had shifted. That was loss number 8. A leader feared for escalation is replaced by a leader associated with calm. The final sign came quietly. A hunting party returned with less than expected. Normally, blame would not fall heavily, but one of the men turned to the rival and asked what adjustments should be made next time. Not to the leader, to the rival. The leader was present. No one corrected it. That was the moment he understood the transition was complete in everything except declaration. He still held title. He still wore the authority. But the current had redirected beneath him. He had won the battle through boldness. But boldness had expanded his shadow too far. And in expanding, he had frightened those who preferred equilibrium. In Viking society, strength is admired. But unchecked strength destabilizes alliances. Alliances, not victories, sustain winter. And winter was coming. He had won the field. But he was losing the future. Winter planning was announced without ceremony. No challenge, no vote. Just a statement that tasks would be divided more evenly this year. Evenly meant redistributed. Redistributed meant diluted. He listened as storage duties were assigned to 3 men instead of 1. Fishing patrols rotated instead of reporting directly to him. Guard shifts scheduled by agreement rather than command. Each change sounded practical. Each change removed a strand from his grip. That was loss number 9. Authority rarely collapses. It disperses. He attempted a correction. He called for a training assembly outside the settlement. Shield drills. Formation discipline. Something physical. Something that reminded them of who had led them to victory. The men came. They lined up. They followed instructions. But the energy was different. Movements were precise, not fierce. Efficient, not eager. When he barked a correction, the rival stepped in afterward and demonstrated the adjustment calmly, almost conversationally. The younger warriors watched him more closely than they watched the leader. That was loss number 10. Attention had shifted during instruction itself. Instruction is control. When control divides, loyalty follows the clearer voice. He escalated slightly. He ordered a mock flanking maneuver and deliberately placed the rival in a supporting role, away from the center. The rival obeyed without protest, but the maneuver faltered. Not disastrously, just enough. A few shields misaligned, a delayed pivot. Afterward, the rival apologized publicly for the confusion and suggested a small structural refinement for future drills. The men murmured approval. The refinement was minor, but the approval was not. That was loss number 11. Even failure could be converted into quiet credit. Days later, a trader arrived from the south. He brought news of political tension. Nearby settlements were aligning differently. Old rivalries shifting. The leader moved to respond decisively. He proposed strengthening outer defenses and limiting outward expansion. The rival did not contradict him. He reframed it. He suggested maintaining visible confidence while quietly reinforcing borders. Not withdrawing, not retreating, just balancing strength with reassurance. The men responded to the word reassurance. It felt safer than restriction. That was loss number 12. Language had become the battlefield. He began to notice that younger warriors lingered near the rival in the evenings. They asked questions about negotiation, about long-term alliances, about stability. They no longer asked about tactics or aggression. The cultural current was shifting from conquest to consolidation, and consolidation rewards those who appear steady rather than dominant. He had built his reputation on decisive action. Now decisiveness felt abrupt in rooms that preferred caution. One night, an older warrior approached him privately. A man who had fought beside him for years. He spoke carefully. He said the settlement was grateful for the victories. Grateful. Past tense. He added that sometimes strength must step back so the community can breathe. Step back, not step down. But the implication was clear. That was loss number 13. The narrative had moved from admiration to management. He was being managed. The next public gathering sealed it further. A dispute erupted between 2 families over winter supplies. The leader stepped forward to resolve it. Before he could conclude, several voices suggested hearing both perspectives fully. He had heard them. He was ready to decide. But the rival asked a clarifying question. Just one. It prolonged discussion. It shifted the center of gravity. When resolution finally came, it was framed as a shared understanding rather than his ruling. Shared understanding erases hierarchy without confrontation. That was loss number 14. The most painful realization came quietly afterward. No one looked relieved by his decision. They looked relieved by the process. The process had replaced the person. He began considering departure, a voluntary campaign elsewhere, a temporary absence framed as opportunity. But absence can finalize replacement. If he left, even briefly, the rival would operate fully in his place. And if nothing collapsed in his absence, his return would feel unnecessary. So he stayed. Staying narrowed him further. His commands became shorter, his presence more reserved. He watched instead of led. And watching does not inspire allegiance. It signals transition. Snow thickened around the settlement. Winter tightened resources. In tight seasons, communities prefer predictability. The rival embodied predictability. He embodied volatility, even if he had not acted volatile. Reputation lags behind behavior. His reputation was forged in battle. Battle leaders are admired in summer. In winter, they are evaluated. The final signal came not in public, but in ritual. During the seasonal oath renewal, warriors traditionally reaffirm loyalty verbally to the leader. This year, the words shifted slightly. They pledged to the settlement, to the protection of the people, to shared prosperity. His name was included, but not centered, not singular. That was loss number 15. He had not been removed. He had been redistributed into the collective. The rival did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply continued acting useful. And usefulness, repeated daily, builds a throne no one needs to declare. The man who had won the battle stood at the edge of the firelight that night and understood something deeper than defeat. Victory had amplified him beyond what the structure could tolerate. The structure responded not with violence, but with correction. Correction disguised as stability. He still held the title. But titles without gravity drift. And gravity had chosen another center. By early winter, the shift was no longer subtle. It had settled. Men no longer measured him to see if he would rise higher. They measured him to see how much space he would take. That was the true reversal. Once, his presence expanded a room. Now it tightened it. Conversations adjusted when he entered. Not out of fear, out of caution. Caution signals instability in perception, not in action. He had not changed his behavior. The room had changed its tolerance. That was loss number 16. A leader does not fall when he makes a mistake. He falls when others begin calculating around him. The rival understood this instinctively. He did not push forward. He absorbed responsibility slowly. When disputes arose, he stood slightly closer to the center. When food shortages were discussed, he volunteered to oversee redistribution. When patrol schedules tightened, he offered to coordinate quietly. Coordination is invisible power. Invisible power feels safer than declared command. The former leader attempted one final assertion. He proposed a winter training exercise beyond the forest line, a show of readiness. The response was measured. Several warriors expressed concern about exposure. The rival suggested conserving strength for spring, not dismissing the idea, delaying it. Delay is deflection without opposition. The proposal dissolved. That was loss number 17. Even initiative no longer anchored the group. Days passed without direct confrontation. That was the cruelty of it. No enemy to fight. No betrayal to expose. Only gradual redistribution of influence. During a small gathering around the fire, a young warrior asked the rival how future raids would be structured. Not whether, how. The assumption of structural authority had shifted completely. The leader sat present, silent. No one corrected the question. That was loss number 18. Questions reveal alignment more clearly than declarations. He realized then that his authority remained only in memory. Memory does not command men preparing for winter. The turning point arrived in the form of an external request. A neighboring settlement invited negotiation for shared grazing rights. The message addressed the settlement broadly, but it requested representation by those responsible for winter stability. The phrasing was intentional. Winter stability had become the rival's domain. The men looked to him before responding. Not openly, not ceremonially. Just a glance. That glance ended it. That was loss number 19. Authority had been reassigned without words. A formal assembly was called, not to remove him, but to clarify roles. Clarification is the final stage of transition. He stood as expected. He spoke briefly about unity and strength. His voice was steady, controlled, but he felt the current already settled. The rival spoke after him. He thanked him for his victories. He acknowledged his leadership in battle. past tense again. Then he suggested that for the sake of long-term security, responsibilities should be shared differently. Shared differently. No accusation, no challenge. Only structural adjustment. The men nodded slowly. Not enthusiastically. Not reluctantly. Calmly. That calm was the confirmation. He was not voted out. He was repositioned. Military command would remain his specialty. Seasonal planning and negotiation would be handled collectively, with the rival coordinating. Coordinating meant deciding. That was loss number 20. He still carried the sword, but the sword no longer defined the center. In Viking society, leadership is fluid but ruthless. It does not require humiliation. It requires replacement. He felt no rage. Rage would have justified removal. He felt something colder. Understanding. He had expanded too quickly. 3 victories. Expanding reputation. External recognition. His shadow had stretched beyond the settlement's comfort. The structure corrected by shrinking him. Not publicly, not violently. Precisely. The weeks that followed were the hardest. Men still respected him. They still trained under him. They still listened during drills. But when decisions about supplies, alliances, and distribution were made, his voice entered as one among several. One among several is not leadership. It is participation. Participation is safe. Safe leaders do not dominate. The rival never declared himself chief. He never claimed the seat. He simply occupied the functions that mattered most during winter, and winter defined survival. By mid-season, the transformation was complete. Visitors addressed the rival first. Disputes defaulted to him. Even jokes at the fire shifted subtly toward his approval. Approval signals gravity. Gravity had migrated. One evening, alone outside the longhouse, the former leader watched the settlement from a distance. Smoke rose steadily. Order intact. No chaos, no fracture. The system had stabilized. Without him at the center, that realization hurt more than removal would have. Removal implies conflict. Replacement implies irrelevance. He had won the battle with decisive force. He had lost his position through quiet comparison. In the end, it was not strength that failed him. It was imbalance. In a society built on shared risk and controlled hierarchy, no man can grow faster than the structure that supports him. If he does, the structure adapts. It redistributes. It cools him. It recenters. He remained within the circle, but no longer at its core. And in Viking society, losing the center does not require defeat. It requires success that unsettles the room. He won the field. The field cheered. But when winter came, the circle chose equilibrium over conquest, and equilibrium does not follow the man who shines brightest. It follows the man who steadies the fire. Spring approached slowly, and with it came opportunity. Opportunity is dangerous in unstable hierarchies because it reveals who truly holds authority. A minor conflict broke out along the southern boundary. Nothing large, just a skirmish between patrols. A test more than a threat. The former leader reacted instantly. He gathered warriors, prepared shields, issued commands with the clarity that had once defined him. Men responded automatically. Muscle memory is loyal long after politics shift. For a moment, it felt as though nothing had changed. That illusion lasted until the rival stepped forward and suggested sending a smaller scouting group first. Not to avoid battle, to avoid escalation. The men hesitated. Hesitation during mobilization is fatal to dominance. That was loss number 21. Even urgency now required consultation. The scouting group went instead of the full force. The situation resolved without bloodshed. The rival framed it afterward as restraint preventing unnecessary loss. The settlement murmured approval. Victory without risk is praised more in spring than boldness that invites retaliation. The former leader saw clearly what had happened. Had he led the larger force and crushed the opposition, he would have appeared aggressive. Had losses occurred, he would have seemed reckless. The rival chose the only path that guaranteed safety. Safety accumulates influence. Influence does not require spectacle. It requires consistency. In the following weeks, planning for the next raid surfaced naturally. Younger warriors asked when they would sail again. The former leader felt the pull of his old domain. Raids were his element: strategy, speed, impact. He outlined a precise route along a wealthy coast. Calculated risks, high reward. The room listened carefully. The rival listened too. Then he asked a single question. If we succeed again, how will the neighboring settlements respond? Not fear, consequence. The question shifted focus from glory to reaction. The men began discussing alliances, retaliation, trade impact. The energy drained from expansion toward preservation. That was loss number 22. His strength created scenarios others now feared managing. A smaller raid was approved instead. Modest, controlled, enough to maintain reputation without amplifying it. He led it. It succeeded. But the success was intentionally limited. Spoils were distributed carefully. No dramatic capture, no banner taken. Even triumph was moderated. He realized something profound then. It was not that he had been removed because he was weak. He had been reduced because he was effective. Too effective. His victories threatened the balance between ambition and survival. Viking settlements thrive not on endless conquest, but on calibrated aggression. Calibration had replaced him as the priority. Weeks later, an elder approached him privately. No hostility, just clarity. He explained that strong leaders are valuable in moments of crisis, but enduring leaders are those who do not force crisis. The distinction was surgical. The former leader asked directly whether he was being sidelined. The elder answered without hesitation, "You are being balanced." Balanced. The word echoed like quiet judgment. That was loss number 23. He was no longer evaluated on achievement. He was evaluated on impact to cohesion. Cohesion had become sacred. A final assembly was called, not dramatic, not accusatory, simply formalizing seasonal roles before summer. The rival was named primary coordinator for negotiations and trade. The former leader retained command of martial training and external defense. On parchment, it looked equal. In practice, it was not. Trade defines alliances. Alliances define survival. Defense without diplomatic leverage is reactive. He had been assigned reaction. Reaction follows initiative. Initiative now belonged elsewhere. That was loss number 24. When the assembly dispersed, several warriors approached him. They expressed respect, gratitude for past victories. Respect is given to legacy. Loyalty is given to presence. That distinction cut deeper than insult. That evening he stood at the shoreline where he had once returned victorious. The sea was calm. The ships rested ready. He understood at last the mechanism of his fall. He had not been betrayed. He had been recalculated. In Viking society, leadership is not overthrown when it fails. It is absorbed when it grows too dominant. The circle had not rejected him. It had recentered around a safer axis. He remained within it, but no longer defined it. And in a culture built on collective survival, the man who wins too brilliantly risks becoming the storm everyone prepares against. He had won battles through decisive force. He lost his position through quiet adjustment. No duel, no exile, just redistribution. And redistribution, in a Viking settlement, is final because it feels reasonable. He would still train warriors, still command when shields locked. But when decisions shaped the future, his voice would be one among several. The rival did not need to claim victory. The structure had claimed it for him. And as summer approached, the settlement moved forward in controlled stability. The former leader watched the men who once rallied to him now rally to balance. He had conquered enemies beyond the shore, but he had underestimated the only opponent that matters in winter, the circle itself. Summer did not restore what winter had reshaped. It confirmed it. The first major decision of the new season was not a raid, but a trade agreement. Delegations from 2 neighboring settlements arrived with guarded optimism. They came not to test strength, but to measure reliability. The rivals stood at the center of negotiation. Calm posture, controlled tone. The former leader stood slightly behind, present but peripheral. He was introduced as the settlement's war commander, not its head. That distinction was deliberate. War commander commands moments, head commands direction. That was loss number 25. His identity had been narrowed to conflict. During negotiation, one of the visiting leaders asked how internal disputes were resolved. The rival answered without hesitation, describing shared council decisions and stable planning structures. The former leader listened as his own past decisiveness was reframed as part of a balanced system rather than its core. Credit redistributed retroactively. That was loss number 26. Even history was being moderated. Later that week, a minor theft occurred within the settlement. A small but symbolic test. Traditionally, such matters would be judged swiftly by the leader. This time, the rival proposed a hearing with multiple voices present. Not because it was required, but because it reinforced collective legitimacy. The accused was judged fairly, calmly, publicly. The process strengthened cohesion. Cohesion strengthens those who facilitate it. That was loss number 27. Justice had become procedural rather than authoritative. The former leader attempted once more to reclaim narrative ground. He proposed a bold raid against a rival who had previously humiliated their allies, a chance to restore regional dominance. The younger warriors showed sparks of excitement, but the elders asked about retaliation chains, supply sustainability, alliance consequences. The rival did not dismiss the raid. He suggested postponement until trade routes stabilized. The excitement cooled. Cooling is quieter than rejection. That was loss number 28. Even ambition required approval beyond him. He began noticing something subtler. When laughter broke out during gatherings, it followed stories of stability, of clever negotiation, of well-managed harvests. Stories of battle were shorter now, less detailed. War had shifted from aspiration to necessity. Necessity does not crown leaders. It tolerates them. The final confirmation came unexpectedly. A dispute between 2 neighboring settlements escalated to the edge of open conflict. Both sought mediation. They requested the rival by name, not because he had fought them, because he was seen as steady. Reputation had fully shifted beyond their borders. That was loss number 29. External validation is the highest form of authority. He could not contest it without appearing insecure. So he remained composed, observant. He fulfilled his role in training, in defense readiness, in external threat response. But the center of gravity no longer required him daily. The rival continued operating without aggression, without triumph. That restraint ensured permanence. A leader who replaces through humility is harder to challenge than one who replaces through force. One evening, as ships were inspected for maintenance, a young warrior approached the former leader. He asked for advice about becoming strong enough to command one day. The former leader answered honestly. Discipline, decisiveness, courage. The young warrior listened carefully, then added quietly, and balance. Balance. The word returned again. That was loss number 30. Even aspiration had been recalibrated around a different model of leadership. He understood then that his fall had not been caused by failure, nor by betrayal. It had been caused by disproportion. In Viking society, glory must remain compatible with structure. When glory grows too visible, structure tightens around it. He had expanded the settlement's influence through conquest. The settlement had responded by redistributing his influence to preserve equilibrium. There was no villain, no conspiracy. Only collective instinct. The circle protects itself first, individuals second. As the sun set over the harbor one evening, he stood watching the rival address a small group about upcoming trade routes. calm, methodical, unchallenged. The former leader felt no hatred, only clarity. He had won the battle that defined his strength, but he had underestimated the battle that defines permanence. The struggle not against enemies beyond the sea, but against imbalance within the circle. And imbalance always loses in the long run. He remained respected, feared in combat, trusted in defense. But leadership in Viking society is not sustained by victories alone. It is sustained by making others feel secure in your shadow. His shadow had grown too large, so the circle adjusted the light. He had won the battle. And quietly, steadily, reasonably, he had lost his position. Years later, no one would remember the exact meeting where the shift became irreversible. That is how power changes in stable societies. Not through a single dramatic vote, but through accumulated acceptance. The former leader remained visible. He trained warriors, he inspected ships, he stood at the front when danger approached. But he no longer shaped the direction of the settlement. Direction had become something negotiated, not declared. And negotiation had found a different voice. The final transformation came during a regional gathering of multiple settlements. A large assembly meant to coordinate trade routes and mutual defense. Traditionally, the most battle-proven leader spoke first. That had once been him. This time, when the time came for representation, there was no argument. The rivals stepped forward naturally. No announcement, no protest. Natural is the most dangerous word in leadership. Natural implies inevitability. That was loss number 31. The shift was now recognized beyond their own walls. The rival spoke carefully. He emphasized stability, shared interest, controlled expansion. He avoided dramatic language. He avoided threats. He presented their settlement as reliable rather than dominant. Other leaders nodded. Agreements were reached quickly. Efficient diplomacy strengthens reputation faster than battlefield glory. The former leader stood among the gathered warriors and understood something final. The world now saw their settlement through the rival's tone, not his. Identity had migrated. On the journey home, younger warriors discussed the meeting. They praised how smoothly negotiations had gone, how respected their settlement appeared. Not feared, respected. Fear creates short alliances. Respect builds lasting ones. He had built fear through victory. The rival had built respect through restraint. That distinction sealed the narrative. That was loss number 32. Even external identity had recalibrated. Back in the settlement, preparations for autumn began early. Resource allocation, livestock planning, winter stockpiles calculated precisely. The rival coordinated seamlessly. The former leader observed that his input was requested only in matters involving direct threat. His influence had become conditional. Conditional authority is not central authority. It is situational. Situational leaders rise in crisis and recede in calm. Calm now dominated. During a quiet evening gathering, an elder finally spoke openly about leadership. Not naming anyone, just principles. He said that strength must serve structure, not overshadow it. That any man who becomes larger than the circle forces the circle to shrink him. The words were not accusation. They were explanation. That was loss number 33. His fall had become a lesson, a story to guide future balance. And stories endure longer than titles. He realized then that resistance would only accelerate erasure. To fight the structure would confirm that he valued personal dominance over collective survival. That would justify removal entirely. So he chose adaptation, not submission. Adaptation. He began training younger warriors not only in combat, but in restraint, in reading a room, in speaking less when the fire burned too bright. He understood now what he had misjudged. Victory had not destroyed him. Its echo had. Echo creates expansion. Expansion invites correction. The rival noticed the shift as well. There was no triumph in his behavior, only continuity. He never spoke against the former leader, never minimized his achievements. That restraint preserved unity. In time, the settlement stabilized fully around the new balance. The former leader became a symbol of decisive force, valuable, respected, but no longer central. The rival became the axis around which everyday life turned. The transition had been bloodless, lawful, reasonable, and permanent. Looking back, the former leader could trace the exact pattern. The first silence after victory. The first suggestion unchallenged. The first time his order was rephrased. The first external message addressed to a council instead of him. Each moment small, together irreversible. Leadership in Viking society was not removed for failure. It was redistributed for imbalance. He had not lost because he was weak. He lost because he shone too brightly in a structure built on shared shadow. And in the end, the circle always chooses the man who steadies it over the man who outgrows it. He had won the battle that made his name echo across the sea, but he lost the quieter battle fought inside the longhouse, where men decide who feels safe leading them through winter. The sea remembers victories. The circle remembers balance. And balance always wins.